This is the story of a meeting so quiet, so private, that even history almost forgot it. A meeting where music's two biggest forces sat face to face, and something unbelievable happened. Today, you will hear every detail, as if you were right there in the room, listening to Bob Dylan and the Beatles change music forever. Before we begin, the interviewer says, leaning forward, tell me this. How did the invitation even happen? The Beatles' road manager sighs and smiles. It was strange, he begins. Bob Dylan didn't send a formal invite. He simply sent a message, a quiet suggestion. If the boys want to talk, I'm here. That was it. No instructions, no big plan, just Dylan being Dylan. At this point, the interviewer raises an eyebrow. So the Beatles agreed immediately? Oh no, the manager laughs. They were nervous. Imagine it. 4 boys from Liverpool meeting the man who wrote Blowin' in the Wind, the man whose lyrics had depth they had never even tried to match before. He pauses, recalling the moment. John said, "What if he thinks we're fools?" Paul said, "What if he asks why our songs don't mean anything?" George stayed quiet, which usually meant he had the deepest thoughts. And Ringo, the interviewer asks. He said, "Can we eat first?" The manager laughs. It was clear the Beatles admired Dylan deeply. They saw him as a poet, a thinker, a man whose music carried weight. And yet, the manager continues softly, Dylan later told us, he was just as nervous. He thought the Beatles might think he was too serious, too cold, too strange. 2 giants of music, both afraid of disappointing the other. This was not a normal meeting. This was destiny warming up backstage. So tell me, the interviewer asks, what was the room like? The witness takes a slow breath. Small, dark, smoky, no spotlight, no stage, just a cramped hotel suite in New York. A couch, 2 chairs, a lamp that flickered like it was tired of being alive. And the Beatles walked in first? Yes, he nods. All 4 together, shoulder to shoulder, like soldiers walking into the unknown. Then Bob Dylan stepped out from behind the curtain, he continues. Not dramatically, not like a star, just quietly. The room froze. For 10 long seconds. John stared at Dylan. Dylan stared back. Paul whispered, "This is unreal." George bowed his head slightly, showing respect. Ringo blinked. A lot. So who spoke first? The interviewer asks. The witness smiles. Dylan did. He looked at all of them and said, "You guys are shorter than I expected." The Beatles exploded with laughter. The tension cracked. John replied instantly, "And you're taller than your songs sound." The 2 shook hands. Firm, nervous, respectful. Here is the shocking part. There was no ego, the witness says. No competition. No, who's the bigger star? Nothing. It felt like 2 planets had finally come into the same orbit. The first eye contact, the first handshake, was the beginning of a conversation that would change the sound of popular music forever. The interviewer leans closer. What did they talk about first? The witness chuckles. John had one question burning inside him. He had rehearsed it 3 days straight. But when the moment came, he froze. What was the question? John finally blurted out, "Bob, how do you write words like that? Words people actually feel?" The room fell silent. Dylan looked at him for a few seconds, long enough to make John uncomfortable. Then he replied quietly, "I just tell the truth, man, even if it's messy." John's eyes widened. He whispered, "We don't. We write what sounds good, not what's real." Dylan shook his head. "Real is messy, John. Music isn't supposed to be clean. It's supposed to hurt a little." Paul watched this exchange closely. His mind was racing. George nodded. He understood instantly. Ringo was listening with surprising seriousness. "So how did John react?" the interviewer asks. He leaned back, the witness says, like someone had just punched him in the soul. It was the moment Lennon realized that music could be more than catchy hooks and clever lines. It could be honest, raw, human. That one answer, the witness concludes, opened a door in John's mind, a door he would never close again. And history proves it. After this meeting, the Beatles' lyrics changed forever, darker, deeper, more personal. All because John asked the question he feared, and Dylan answered with the truth. The interviewer turns to another witness. Paul McCartney is known for being confident. Did he ask Dylan anything? A soft laugh escapes the witness. Oh, Paul was confident, but that night he was curious more than anything. Paul leaned forward, elbows on knees, and said something nobody expected. Bob, sometimes I feel like our melodies are stronger than our words. Does that make us less honest? Dylan smirked. Honesty has many flavors, he replied. Some people sing their truth through some through melody, you through emotion. Paul blinked. Emotion? Yes, Dylan said. You're the heart guy, Paul. John is the fire. George is the soul. Ringo is the glue. You all play different truths. Paul looked relieved. He exhaled slowly, like a man who had been forgiven for something unspoken. But then, the witness adds, Dylan asked Paul a question. Why don't you write something painful, something you're scared to admit? Paul froze. John stared at him. George waited. Ringo shifted quietly. Paul finally whispered, because I don't want the world to see that part of me. Dylan nodded. That's exactly why you should. This was not a lecture, not advice. It was a challenge, from one master songwriter to another. And later, Paul would write songs like Yesterday, Let It Be, and Hey Jude. Songs born from vulnerability, exactly what Dylan planted inside him that night. The interviewer taps his pen. And what about George? He was quiet, right? The witness nods. Quiet. But his silence was loud. George sat across from Dylan, almost studying him. Dylan noticed and asked, You got something to say, George? George replied softly, I think I understand your music more than the others do. Dylan raised an eyebrow. How so? George took a breath and said, Your songs feel like searching, like you're trying to find something you already know but can't say out loud. For the first time that night, Dylan looked surprised. That's exactly it, he whispered. The room paused. John blinked. Paul leaned forward. Even Ringo sensed something deep was happening. Dylan asked George, And what are you searching for? George looked down at his hands and answered, Peace. Maybe God. Maybe myself. Dylan nodded slowly. You're closer than you think. That moment created a silent connection, a thread between two spiritual souls who felt misunderstood in their own worlds. The witness smiles. Later, Dylan told us he'd never met someone who understood his heart so quickly. It was this moment that sparked a friendship which would continue for decades, long after the Beatles ended. George didn't meet his influence that night. He met his mirror. The interviewer asks, This all sounds very intense. Did anything funny happen? The witness laughs immediately. Oh yes, the funniest moment of the night came from, who else? Ringo. The room was quiet, deep, philosophical, until Ringo suddenly blurted out, So, does anyone want tea? Or are we all pretending to be poets tonight? Everyone burst into laughter, even Dylan, who almost spilled his drink. John exclaimed, Ringo, you're a national treasure. Dylan added, He's the only honest one in the room. But Ringo wasn't finished. He stood up dramatically and announced, If anyone needs me, I'll be in the kitchen making British culture. Row. The whole room erupted. The heaviness vanished. The tension evaporated. That single joke reset the energy. Now everyone was relaxed, comfortable, open. The interviewer smiles. So, Ringo saved the night? In a way, yes, the witness replies. He reminded everyone that even legends, geniuses, and poetic minds are still just people in a room trying to talk. From that moment onward, the conversation flowed naturally, without fear or hesitation. Ringo didn't just make tea that night, he made space for truth. The interviewer straightens. When did the music begin? The witness inhales sharply. Ah, that moment. It was magic. Without a word, Dylan picked up his guitar. No announcement, no grand gesture. He just started tuning it softly, like a man whispering to an old friend. The Beatles froze. All four, their eyes wide, breaths held. Dylan strummed a single chord, just one, deep, warm, imperfect, but honest, the kind of sound that comes from a life lived, not a song rehearsed. John whispered, "That's it. That's the sound." Paul nodded slowly. The sound of a man thinking. George closed his eyes. Ringo stopped fidgeting. Then Dylan began singing a verse, not from a famous song, not from an album, but something unreleased, something personal. The witness explains, it was a song about loneliness and feeling famous but empty, a song nobody else had ever heard. When he finished, silence filled the room. John finally said, "Bob, that felt like reading your diary." Dylan shrugged. That's what songs should feel like. The Beatles never forgot that moment, because for the first time they saw what raw honesty looked like in music. And it terrified them and inspired them. That single chord would echo into their next albums, changing everything they would write from that night forward. The interviewer lowers his voice. "I've heard there was a private conversation between John and Dylan. Alone?" The witness nods. "Yes, and it was intense." John signaled Dylan quietly and the two stepped into the dim hallway outside the room. Nobody followed. Nobody dared. "What did they talk about?" the interviewer asks. The witness breathes out slowly. John finally confessed the thing he never said in front of the others. John told Dylan, "I don't know if I'm real anymore." Dylan stared at him. "What do you mean?" John replied, "The world loves us, but they don't know me. Sometimes I don't know me." A long sigh. Espel. Dylan then said something that shook John to the core. "Fame is a mask, John. If you wear it too long, it becomes your face." John swallowed hard. "And what do I do?" "Take it off," Dylan said, "even if it hurts." This wasn't poetry. It was guidance, a warning, a map drawn from Dylan's own scars. John returned to the room quieter but clearer, like a man who had seen a truth he could never unsee. The interviewer whispers, "Did that conversation change John?" The witness nods. "Forever." And the world later saw it, in songs like "Help," "In My Life," and "Strawberry Fields Forever." John didn't walk back into the room alone. He walked in with a new voice. The interviewer raises his eyebrow. "Is it true they made some kind of agreement that night?" The witness smiles slowly. "Yes, but nobody knew about it for years. It wasn't written, it wasn't official, it wasn't even spoken loudly." It happened as Dylan was preparing to leave. He looked at the Beatles and said, "Promise me one thing, stop pretending. Make music only if it scares you." John nodded immediately. Paul hesitated, but then smiled. George bowed his head in respect. Ringo said, "As long as there's tea." Dylan chuckled, then added, "And I'll promise something too. I'll try writing something a bit lighter, something the world can hum." John laughed. "You? A cheerful song? Impossible." Dylan shrugged. "Well, maybe I'll surprise you." What nobody realized was, That pact shaped the next decade of music. The Beatles became deeper, braver, more emotional. Dylan later wrote songs with clearer melodies, closer to pop structure, even if still poetic. Two worlds influenced each other. Two styles blended. Rock became smarter, folk became louder, and popular music became forever changed. That small moment, a simple casual pact, ended up shaping the sound of the 1960s. A promise made softly in a smoky hotel room, echoed across generations. The interviewer folds his arms. Tell me about the moment they said goodbye. The witness exhales. It didn't feel like goodbye. Not at all. Dylan stood by the door, guitar on his back. The Beatles gathered around him. Not like fans, not like equals, but like brothers who had just been through something sacred. John shook Dylan's hand first, but he held it longer than normal. Thank you, John said, voice shaking, for the truth. Paul followed. You changed something in us tonight, he whispered. George simply touched Dylan's shoulder, a gesture deeper than words. Ringo said, Next time, I'm choosing the snacks. They all laughed. Dylan stepped into the hallway, turned back one last time and said, Don't forget the pact. John answered, We won't. The door closed. The witness pauses. After that night, nothing was ever the same. The Beatles walked into that room as the biggest band in the world, but they walked out as something else, artists who finally knew what their music could become. The interviewer asks softly, So that conversation truly changed music? The witness nods, forever. Because from that night came new lyrics, new risks, new truths, and new songs that still echo today. Two giants met in silence, spoke honestly, and shaped a generation, without even realizing it. The greatest revolutions are often whispered.